Okay, it's showtime. It's Wednesday night. It's 8 o'clock. It's Panther-Lair Show here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. Jim Hammett from Panther-Lair.com will be joining us momentarily to talk about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. You know the website, though, to get coverage of everything happening at Pitt, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans all day, every day. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. That's the website. And of course, our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's a place to get all of your Pitt video content. Daily morning Pitt videos, Monday through Friday. Just getting your day started with a little bit of Pitt sports talk about whatever's happening in the world of Pitt sports. These weekly live shows every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, where you can join the conversation with me and Jim. Put your comments in the chat screen over there. Your comments, your questions, we'll read and respond and react to as many of them as we possibly can. And then our live post-game shows. We had one after the Georgia Tech game yesterday. That was a lot of fun. Had one after the Duke game on Saturday. That was also a lot of fun. We'll have one after the Miami game this Saturday. We will see if that will be quite as much fun as the first two were. Either way, win or lose, it's fun to get together and talk about it after the game. And that's sort of what those post-game shows do. For me, for you, it's give us opportunity to sort of vent about the game. Like I say, good or bad, win or lose. Did them all through the football season. That was a lot of fun. And we'll do them through basketball as well. The basketball road games. It's a little too much to do them after the home games, but we'll do them after the road games and hang out for an hour or 45 minutes or however long it takes to talk about whatever happens in the game. So you want to make sure you don't miss any of that stuff, whether it's the live streams, the morning pits, the post-game shows, whatever it may be. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you won't miss anything. Of course, like this video as well. And if you want to get in on the conversation, you can post your comments and your questions over the chat screen there on the right-hand side of the screen. If you want to make sure your comment gets read or your question gets answered, you can be a super chatter, and that will be really cool. We will definitely read your comment, answer your question if you do that. So without further ado, let's bring in Jim Hammett. He says he's got new headphones. He says they work. So let's see. Oh, what do you think about that on the screen, Jim? You like going? Is this too much? What do you think?
Different. Yeah, I don't know.
It is different.
Let's try it for a while.
I feel like this is like pardon the interruption, when like Wilbon would be on location, like at the NBA Finals or something. They would have screens like this. Or this is like Around the Horn when it was down to like 2 people left. Did you? I mean, were you a big Around the Horn or PTI guy?
Definitely.
Really?
I was like, yeah, like growing up, like do my homework and watch PTI.
Right. Early 2000s. I mean, like when those shows first came out, it was great. I mean, like it ultimately, probably the success of those two shows bastardized what ESPN would ultimately become with the whole embrace debate idea, is because like, wow, PTI is such a hit. Maybe we should do this with every show we have. And they all, they shouldn't have, but those shows were, and like, I really like Around the Horn when it first started. I was like, this is great. I mean, I'd never heard of those people before. I never heard of Tim Kalishaw or Woody Page or,
what about Shane Mariotti?
I was trying to think. I was drawing a blank. Who's the one guy who was a real weirdo that like got into all kinds of weird. But I mean, yeah, guys, people like that, or Michael Hawley, or Michael Smith. I mean, like, good writer. And then when it sort of occurred to me, like, oh, these are like writers. These guys aren't like TV celebrities. These are just writers talking about sports. That's a lot of fun. I used to read, like, Michael Wilbon would do a chat on the Washington Post website, and he'd be like, Kornheiser's leaning over my shoulder telling me I should say this or that in the chat. And I'd be like, what a cool life to live, that you're just hanging out in the newsroom of the Washington Post, talking sports with Kornheiser and Wilbon. But anyway, that's what this kind of looks like. I don't know if I felt like there was too much like negative space on the screen when we did this other view. That, like, I don't know. Well, people can get in the comments if you prefer the. I'm going to stick to the extreme. I could just keep going back and forth, and it could be like a music video from the '80s. But before we jump into Pitt stuff, Jim Harbaugh, no surprise, right? I mean, this is what I expected. You expect him to take an NFL job this offseason?
But it seems like it's almost a done deal with the Chargers, and like in my head, like because he started his coaching career at the University of San Diego. It's like, oh, he's going back. But the Chargers aren't in San Diego anymore.
No. They were when PTI came out.
Yeah,
So,
that is
you
true.
know, it's a formative time. And and it seems like Michigan's going to just promote the assistant coach. I'm sure they like him, and I'm sure he did a good job when Jim Harbaugh was suspended, but like, I don't know. I feel like you could aim higher. I don't know if it always works out when that assistant coach that all the players love. And I mean, this is the Jamie Dixon scenario, right? That all the players love the assistant coach, so they convince the school to hire him. And it worked out with Jamie Dixon, but like a lot of times it doesn't. I don't know if you would say it worked out with Bill Stewart at West Virginia. I don't know if you would say it's working out at Notre Dame right now. I mean, they were fine this year. They didn't make the playoff. So, and I mean, you're not going to write it off. I'm drawing a blank on that coach, Marcus Freeman. I'm not writing off the Freeman era completely at Notre Dame, but the players support an assistant, so that's who they hire. I think that's a good idea at Akron, or maybe even like Iowa State or Minnesota, maybe even Pitt. Michigan, you're coming off a national championship. I feel like you have an opportunity to. I don't know who that splash hire would be, but I feel like you could maybe get something a little splashier than just promoting from within, no matter how much the players might support him.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, the timing, like Harbaugh didn't do them a lot of favors on the timing because, like, sure, Michigan can throw a lot of money at someone and probably hire anyone they want, but like, guys are already like into like what they're doing for next season. Like, everyone's already thinking about 2024. So I feel like it would be kind of like, yeah, someone would take the job, but some people might be like, you know what, like, I'm already in it. Like, the season has started. Like, I
Yeah.
kind of get it from that point of view.
I wonder if, I mean, we've seen Alabama have this mass exodus. And actually, Adam Vinchik asked the question here, says, any chance Pitt goes after any Michigan players that might or will enter the portal? I'd go after a corner. So, I mean, we've seen that with Alabama, right? We've seen this mass exodus after Nick Saban leaves because the transfer portal reopens for a 30-day window when your coach leaves. But I mean, it's January 24th. I don't know Michigan's academic calendar, but like, these guys are probably in school by now, right? Like, I even if you have a 30-day window to enter the transfer portal, you're starting to come up against certain academic deadlines and walls that you're not going to be able to get through, either getting out at Michigan or getting into a new school when you're not getting there until like the first week of February. And maybe some schools have later semester starts, but I'd have to think there'd be certain limitations. The transfer portal might be open, but that doesn't necessarily mean the academic, the admissions office at Texas is open right now. You know what I mean? Like, I think maybe Michigan keeps a bit more of its roster together than Alabama has just because of this late date.
I think just because of the late date, but also because if they do promote, like, you're kind of like selling your own team on like, we're not rocking the boat, like we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. So I think in that sense, like, more of their players may be inclined to stay because not much is going to change. It's still going to be the same staff, still going to be the same guys that recruited them. It's just, the guy answering the questions at the press conference is going to be a little different. But like, for the most part, I mean, I think that's the benefit Michigan has over Alabama. It's like they're just trying to maintain what they're doing.
And maybe that's the upside of keeping him, is you should have a better chance at keeping the roster together. I mean, I think more at Alabama than Michigan, players went to Alabama to play for a certain head coach. I think Nick Saban was a big part of the draw there. Whereas, probably more than Harbaugh was at Michigan. I think I saw Stuart Mandela or somebody had a mailbag today in the Athletic where he said that, of like, part of the the reason Alabama's had such an exodus is because guys went to Alabama to play for Nick Saban. If Saban's not there, I mean, Alabama's still Alabama, but that takes a big part of the draw away. Harbaugh was a big part of the draw, but I don't know if he was quite as big as Saban. So maybe, with that element and the late date and promoting from within, maybe that, maybe they keep some of the roster together. But yeah, if Pitt can find a corner, I'm sure there are corners on Michigan's roster that Pitt recruited. I'm sure if we went through the offer sheets, we'd find plenty of guys that went to Michigan. If you could happen to get one, they go into the portal. We've seen today, so this is actually probably a good segue into Pitt stuff, is like we saw today when we talked to Nick James, David Ojebwe, and Nate Matlack, two of those guys, James and Ojebwe, when they went into the transfer portal, Pitt was one of their first options and first schools they thought about because they had a prior connection, because they'd been recruited by Pitt out of high school, and that relationship kind of already existed. So if there's guys at Michigan, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head right now that Pitt was trying to get that went to Michigan, but there are Pitt targets every year, right?
There's probably more crossover with guys that Pitt recruited with Michigan as opposed to Alabama.
Yeah.
Just with the Midwest, like Michigan recruits a lot of the same areas. It's they're identifying the same players. So I would think Michigan's roster probably has guys with Pitt offers on it.
And guys who have visited Pitt too.
Yeah.
I mean, they probably like had maybe not an official visit, but a spring camp visit, a game visit, a junior day. They're far more likely, I think, to get guys who end up at Michigan to come to campus than guys who end up at Alabama. Well, At Harris wants to know what the SPF of my shirt is. What's wrong with my shirt, Jim?
It's it kind of looks blurry whenever, like, when we're up this close. Maybe that's what he's going with. No, didn't really change much.
No. I mean, it's got orange stripes. Is that what you're talking about? It's a shirt, man. I got a gray t-shirt underneath. Would you prefer that? Well, At Harris, though, I will, you want to make any comment you want on my shirt. If you're a super chatter, you can do it. Knock yourself out, man. We appreciate your support. Adam Vichik says Clemson the Clemson defensive end and Nate Matlack seem really impressive. Glad they added to the D-line room. Yeah, so I think we've spoken to these guys before. I interviewed Nate Matlack after he committed as a transfer from Kansas State. I think you interviewed David Ojebwe, right? Yeah. You got him on the phone. Both really impressive guys. I assume your interview with David was as impressive as he was in the press conference today, but both really good, well-spoken, laid out why they came to Pitt, why they chose Pitt out of the portal. And I thought both of those guys, plus Nick James and Lyndon Cooper, who also spoke today, they very much had a different perspective on recruiting out of the transfer portal. And I think they laid out how it was different from coming out of high school. And I think, and I'm sure, I mean, you and I both talked to a lot of guys over the last couple of years who have transferred. And it is that second recruitment, they don't have the same approach as they had in high school. They don't get wowed by the same things. It's far more business-like. Some of them, I think, are willing to commit without taking visits because they're looking for things that they're not necessarily going to see on the visit. They're not as, bowled over by attendance. That kind of stuff doesn't rate as high, I don't think, for transfers as it does for high school kids who maybe are more impressionable. But don't you get the sense it's like a more business-like approach for these guys when they go into the transfer portal? We call it a second recruitment, but it's not like the high school recruitment. It's got a different vibe to it.
Yeah, I think it's a different. It kind of depends where you transfer from. Like Ojebwe coming from Clemson, like that's what you're talking about. He's not wowed by anything. He's kind of looking for the football side of things. But when you talk about guys from like FCS schools, like they take a lot of visits, like because they never got that attention out of high school. Like they ended up at Western Carolina for a reason. So like they're a little more wide-eyed and they're more willing to take visits and take pictures and really soak it up because they didn't get that attention. So I mean, I think it's different for everyone. But like speaking to the guys today, they're all they were Power 5 guys, so they kind of fall in that first category of okay, I did all that. I went to a school. I know how college football works. Now I'm just looking for a spot where I can fit in. And I think, Ojebwe specifically, it's like he didn't crack the lineup as a freshman, but he knew he had a good relationship with Charlie Partridge and he trusted him. And I know you wrote about that today with, all the defensive linemen. It's like he was the reason why. So that's kind of, being more pointed in your recruitment is, knowing this position coach is really good. And that's kind of where I want to go.
Yeah. And I think, and we've often talked about guys come out of high school and they'll talk about, oh, they can help me get me to the NFL. But I really believe every guy coming out of high school thinks they're already a first round draft pick. Like I don't really need development. I just need to play somewhere for 3 years and go to the NFL because that's where I'm. But I think once guys go to college for a year or two, Ojebwe for 1 year, Nick James was in college for 2 years. Nate Matlack's been there for 4 years. This is his 5th year. they have a different, I think, appreciation for development. And I think that's why Ojebwe, James, and Matlack all talked so much about Charlie Partridge and why Partridge was such a huge factor here, because they're looking at Partridge had a first-round draft pick, less than 12 months ago that he produced, and a guy who was a 3-star recruit coming out of high school, lower rated than James and Ojebwe were, probably equivalent to Matlack. And he developed him into a first-round draft pick. And I think that stood out a lot to these guys. And they look at it, I think, differently than high school guys do. And not that I doubt Jasir Whittington and Francis Brew when they say, "Oh, Charlie Partridge can get me to the NFL," but I think there's a little more sincerity with those transfers. What do you expect out of Ojebwe? I'm really curious. I don't know if you looked much at the video today. I mean, he looks like he's put together. He was really good as a high school guy. He had a ton of offers and highly rated and all that stuff. He had the pedigree. Didn't play at all at Clemson, but I don't really make anything of that. It's Clemson. You know what I mean? He was a true freshman. I mean, do you project him as a starter right now? If you were going to write the depth chart for spring camp, where would you put it, David Ojebwe?
I mean, I think he'd be on the 2 deep, and I think he's competing for snaps. I don't know if he's like a defined like number one. I mean, I think that's Deion Hayes, and there's probably 3 or 4 guys kind of in that mix after him. But I think he's going to play. I mean, but I always thought Nakai Johnson was going to play too, and he never did. So it's hard to project, but I mean, he looks good. I mean, less than a year ago, every college in the country wanted him. So I mean, that has to speak for something. So I know Clemson wasn't 12-0, one of the best teams in college football this year, but like you said, it's still Clemson. I mean, they have other guys, so I think he could still be very productive, and he might be starting by the end of the year.
It'd be interesting. I wonder. I'm trying to think of who, like, if I was going to project right now, and I mean, it's an exercise of futility. I mean, we have no idea. We haven't seen any practices yet. They haven't practiced yet. I mean, so we think Nakai Johnson's moving inside to D tackle, right? So that would take him out of the mix as a starter at end. Deion Hayes will be 1, but I feel like it either comes down to one Nate or the other, right? It's either Temple or Matlack. I think is the other starter. I mean, I guess Bambrima could still be in the mix there. I kind of feel like Matlack might actually be the guy. I mean, he's really intriguing to me. I mean, he's got decent size. He's older. He's experienced. I think, when we looked at his stats, playing as a 3-4 defensive end at Kansas State, which we all know is not exactly a productive position to be a 3-4 defensive end, he would have been like second on the team for Pitt in like sacks and tackles for loss last season. And now he's going to get an opportunity to rush off the edge, to actually be an edge rusher in a 4-3 defensive line. Like, I actually think I'm just as intrigued by him as I am by anybody else. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's the starter for most, if not all, of the season this year.
No, I kind of agree with that. And I think that's kind of the idea when you bring in a graduate transfer, is you're looking for an instant impact. I mean, I think Ojebwe, like, just given his pedigree, there's a lot to like, and that might take a year or 2 to get rolling. But when you bring in a guy like Nate Matlack in his 5th year, who's played a lot of football, played in a major conference, yeah, I mean, I think that's the type of guy you're looking to bring in. And I think there's a reason they wanted to, because they didn't get a lot of production out of defensive end last year, and they lost the only good one they really had, besides Deion. So it's like, yeah, they needed that instant impact to offset Okunlola leaving.
Yeah, they probably needed another transfer defensive end last year, honestly. And now, after losing him, and that's all they lost. I was trying to think about this earlier today, right? Okunlola is the only defensive end who left, right? Did they lose anybody else?
I don't think.
I don't think so either. Nate Temple went into the portal and came back out. Deion Hayes was, who knows where he was, but he's here. I don't think there's anybody else they lost. So they bring back what they had from last year. They add in 2 transfers, and they bring in how many recruits did they sign? I've already moved on. 2/3, depending on what Ty Uhas does.
Yeah, I think Uhas is going to be inside. Crothers is an end, and I think they said the same thing to Sincere Edwards. We'll figure out when you get here.
Yeah, right. Sincere.
So they have 2, maybe defensive. So they have 1. They have Crothers and maybe another, and maybe another after that.
Crothers had like 75 sacks or something, right? Like he was like ridiculously productive as a senior, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was very good, and he was like on the number 2 high school team in the country. Like he was
Yeah.
their like main defensive player. So
Yeah. Oh, good. Pitt just tweeted out the wallpaper, Jim, if you want to set the wallpaper of the 2024 football schedule. So there you go. If you want to get that schedule release, I'm sure you saw the tweet video. I thought that was pretty clever. I generally think when athletic departments and football organizations or sports organizations do these things, they're by and large stupid and childish and immature and ridiculous. But I thought that was a pretty clever one. Shopping at the Brentwood Giant Eagle. I don't know why they were in Brentwood. I haven't figured that out yet. But shopping at the Brentwood Giant Eagle, all the little, the grocery items being somehow relevant to the team that they were portraying. I don't know. What did you, when they started it, I started cringing. I was like, oh God, here we go. But then I was like, man, that actually wasn't bad. And we've seen far worse, I would say.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. And it's, to the Brentwood point, there was a Giant Eagle 3 blocks from the football field or facility. Like, why wouldn't they use that one? But no, I thought it was good. I think last year they did like a Jeopardy spoof or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know if it goes back beyond that or this trend just kind of started, but yeah, it wasn't bad.
Wait, are you talking about the Southside Giant Eagle?
Yeah.
I don't think they would go to the Southside Giant Eagle. Have you ever gone to the Southside Giant Eagle?
I used to live right by it.
I mean, would you recommend going to film a video there?
Yeah, I mean, you get some characters.
I mean, like you don't have to go all the way out to like Settlers Ridge or someplace, but you could at least go to like Shady Side or, you could find another market district. I guess Giant Eagle, I'm sure probably sponsored it in some way, but like, I don't know why they picked Brentwood. It looked like a nice Giant Eagle, I guess.
Did, yeah.
I mean, it looked pretty nice in the video. I also, I'm the kind of person that reads into these things. I thought having Terrence Moore, Donovan McMillan, Solomon DeShields, I get it. Terrence Moore is interesting to put in there. Not that we didn't assume he'd be a starter this year, but it's interesting to put him forward as sort of a face of the program. And they mentioned Nate, right? Didn't they? I think at the beginning they were like, "Where's Nate? Isn't Nate supposed to be here?"
I did, yeah.
So, you tie that in with like Pat Narduzzi apparently telling ESPN that Nate Yarnell is I read into these things. Like of all the players that they could have picked to reference, they picked Nate Yarnell, who I don't know, maybe they're really trying to put the full force of the press, their public relations machine behind Nate Yarnell as the starting quarterback. Is that what's happening here? Is that why they mentioned him?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like sometimes in these like off-season interviews, Narduzzi just kind of starts talking in a circle, and I don't really know if that really means anything. And as he said last year, he doesn't have any say in who the quarterback is apparently. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, maybe. I mean, they only said Nate. Maybe they were talking about Temple or Matlack. So it could have been. Who knows? Maybe Nathan Bossery. Maybe Bossery came back. Nate Bossery blocked me this season. Did I tell you that?
This season,
I forget. I said something. Oh, I know what it was. What did I tweet?
How did you even notice? Like, how did you stumble upon his Twitter?
So I'll tell you, there was one of these like ridiculous prompts where like a beautiful woman walks into an elevator with you. It's like, what do you say? What's your opening line or something? And, everybody's replies to it are like silly stuff. So I quote tweeted it with like a long paragraph about how James Conner moved to running back, not because Russell Shell transferred from the team, but because Corey Clement decommitted. I mean, I'm sure I've gone on this spiel many times in the past. I don't need to repeat it, but I wrote like this long paragraph, like, ha, 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 this beautiful woman walks into an elevator with me. I'm going to tell her about how in 2012, Pitt started recruiting James Conner as a running back because of Corey Clement, not Russell Shell. So, ha, 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 I get some funny jokes and replies. And Nathan Bossery, former Pitt tight end / long snapper / trick play touchdown scorer at Virginia Tech, replies to me, and he's like, this is low class. And I'm like, Nathan Bossery? What? And then I click, and he's blocked me for like making a joke about this. And I'm like,
yeah, I don't think he got it.
Dude. So hopefully that's not who Terrence Moore, Donovan McMillan, and Solomon DeShields are talking about when they said Nate. But, on this quarterback thing, Homer Simpson says, normally I'd be happy that Pitt picked a starter at quarterback going into spring to have an early jump, but this year is different. New OC, new system, and I believe Nate Yarnell doesn't fit the system. And he goes on to say, think they should have had a competition and waited to announce the starter. So, all right. everything that we're basing all of this conversation on, and there have been multiple articles written off of this, was something David Hale said that came from a phone conversation he had with Pat Narduzzi. He didn't quote Pat Narduzzi, to my knowledge. He didn't play audio of this. It was just like, Pat Narduzzi told me, and that's not to discredit any of it, but, you know, I think it's important to set sort of the context of it there. And I think all Narduzzi told him was, I almost called him bossery, Nate Yarnell is the first team quarterback. He's the QB1 going into spring camp. I don't think he was named the starter. I don't think it was anything like that. It was just, he's the top quarterback going into spring camp, which I think you and I have talked about. Like, that's what it should be, right? He was the starter to finish the season. Like, somebody has to walk out there and take the first snap with the first team, right? When they go to team drills, somebody has to walk out there and take the snap, the very first snap. And that's the first team quarterback. And why wouldn't it be the guy who is the starter at the end of the season? Like, I think it's much ado about nothing. And I think what I would say, and I think what we have both said for a long time, is like, look, if they go into spring camp and Nate Yarnell stinks and Christian Bayer is awesome, or Eli Holstein is awesome, or Ty Diefenbach is awesome, whoever, they're going to play over, they're going to move it around. It'll be an open competition, but there still has to be an order when you walk out on the field of who's taking the ones, who's taking the twos, who's taking the threes, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a very big difference in saying who's the number one going into the offseason than as opposed to the season. I mean, I think Mike Tomlin said the other day, like, yeah, Kenny Pickett's the number one quarterback going into the offseason. We don't know what the offseason is going to bring for them, and we don't know what the offseason is going to bring for Pitt. I mean, it's just like you said, it's someone's going to take that first snap at the first spring practice and throw a ball to Mumfield, and like that's it. Like, there's nothing more to it. No, Pitt, we do not know who Pitt's starting quarterback is. I don't think Pat Narduzzi knows who it is, and I don't think whatever came of that little story from David
exchange,
exchange story. I don't know. I don't think
anecdote. I guess it was an anecdote, right? Is what it was. It was an anecdote. Yarnell would be the favorite for the season, though, wouldn't he? As we sit here.
Yeah, I would say he's number one going into the offseason for a reason. But no, he kind of has to be. I mean, he finished the year as a starter, and he didn't do anything wrong. I thought he played pretty well, and I think that, you know, his teammates like him, but it's a brand new offense, and all three of them have to learn it. So, I mean, I think Cade Bell's going to really thoroughly evaluate all of them.
All four. I don't know who you forgot, but there's four. Holstein, Yarnell, Bayer, and Diefenbach, right?
5. Julian Duggar.
Oh, that's right. He enrolled early. That's right. Okay, and so that's the thing with, like, you know, when it was being made a big deal of like, oh, Narduzzi said that Yarnell is the QB1 going into spring camp. It's like, well, who else would it be? Like, Eli Holstein just got there. Julian Duggar just got there. Ty Diefenbach's a redshirt freshman who didn't play at all last year. And Yarnell beat Bayer. You know, like, Bayer was benched for Yarnell. Like, who else would be the quarterback one? And I guess people would say, like, well, I don't want there to be any quarterback one. But again, somebody, like, they all go into practice. I mean, you and I have watched practice when they're doing like drills and stuff. They're like, ones are up, twos are up, threes are up. And that doesn't mean that's a guarantee for the season, like you said, but that means for that day, the first team group has this player, and this player. Maybe they'll switch them in the middle of practice, be like, you're going to go to the twos, you're going to go to the ones, but there are ones, there are twos, there are threes. I don't know. It's just, I think there have been years in the past. Well, let me say it this way. Every time they've needed a new starting quarterback and they've had a competition in the spring and the summer, pretty much the guy who was supposed to win won. You know what I mean? Like, every time. Like, Max Brown won it in 2017. Keaton Slovis won it in 22. Phil Dracovic won it in 23. Those guys were supposed to win. They were brought in with the expectation of winning the starting job. They were brought in probably being told that they were, you know, they were being brought in to be the starter. I don't know if it was promised or not, but like, they were expected to win and they ended up winning. Did they win because they outplayed everybody else, or did they win just because it was just expected that they would? I don't know. You know, given what we saw of Christian Bayer and given what we saw of, or what we know of Frank Signetti's opinion of Nate Yarnell, I would imagine that he probably thought Phil Dracovic looked the best. And other people too have said like, yeah, Phil was the best quarterback in camp, and then they got into the games. You know what I mean? And it was obviously a different story. Like, I don't know, I think there's some confirmation bias sometimes when we look at it and you're like, Narduzzi promises the starting job to quarterbacks. And I say, well, I don't know if he promises it or not. And they're like, well, look, Slovis, look at Dracovic. It's like, well, okay, yeah, those guys won the job, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they were just handed the job. They might have actually won it in practice. You know what I mean? Like, maybe Slovis really was better than Nick Patty in practice 2 years ago. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility.
No, and I mean, I think coming out of camp last year, I mean, the whispers we were hearing is Vayer was a little careless with the ball, and that kind of translated onto the field. I mean, he threw some interceptions in camp, and that didn't really sit well with anyone. And that was part of the reason why Phil Dracovic was the starter. So yeah, I mean, guys are brought, like Keaton Slovis didn't come here from across the country to sit on the bench, like, but he still had to go out and win the job, and I think he did. I mean, I know he did. Like that's what happened, but I get it, but like I don't think anyone knows who Pitt's starting quarterback is. So Homer Simpson was a little nervous about Nate Yarnell's definitely starting next year. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah. All right. ZC717 says, I would say it's his job to lose. It's a matter of how well he picks up Cade Bell's offense. Yeah, I think that's I mean, Nate Yarnell enters spring camp as QB1, and he stays QB1 until someone else takes it from him. And I think that's probably what it is. And it's what it should be. He finished the season as the starter, All right, schedule release today. Jim CC717 actually started the quarterback conversation a few minutes ago, but he also asked, what are you and Jim's thoughts on the release of Pitt's football schedule for this year? And also, and then about Nate Yarnell. Wait, we started talking about the schedule. We talked about the schedule release thing.
Not the schedule itself.
And then we got distracted by trying to figure out what Nate they were talking about. And I related my truly hilarious Nathan Bossery blocked me story. Nathan Bossery, Willie Taggart, Tino Sinceri, Deontay Johnson. Wow. I have no idea how that one happened. I have no idea what Juice Up 3, whatever I did to him to cause him to block me. I don't even think I interviewed him when he was in I've never even heard of the guy before the Steelers drafted him. I don't think I interviewed him coming out of high school or anything like that, but I'm blocked by Deontay Johnson. I think Jonathan Baldwin too. I'm not really sure what I did there, but anywho, schedule release. So we talked about the schedule release video. First thought, what stands out to you about this schedule? I mean, we've known the opponents, but what jumps out to you with the dates and everything?
The thing that jumps out to me the most is the 2 bye weeks in 4 weeks. I think that's very unique. That doesn't happen a lot. I mean, I know Pat Narduzzi has never been a fan of the short week, and so Pitt has to play Syracuse on a Thursday night, so they have 12 days to prepare for that one instead of 4. So I know that's probably something he was very vocal about, and I'm sure a lot of ACC coaches were like, that kind of stinks to play on a Thursday after a Saturday. So I get that, but it is just kind of unique to have 2 bye weeks like that. It right in the middle of the season. I don't think I recall that happening too often.
No, I mean, I think they have 2 games over the course of 32 days. I'm just kind of scanning through here, and it looks like everything I've seen so far, Clemson does not have a Thursday night game. That's lame. But most of these teams, if they play on a Thursday, they've got an open week before that. Louisville plays on a Friday, and they have a game the week before that. But Pitt obviously has the open week before the Syracuse game. I'm looking at the master schedule. Miami's got a Friday night game, and they have a game the week before that. But for the most part, it looks like if teams had to play on Thursday night, they have an open week ahead of that. So, kudos to the ACC for pulling that off. But obviously, like you said, that ends up with Pitt in the unique position of playing 2 games in 32 days. It's going to feel weird when we're in that stretch.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I mean, like there's an off week on September 28th, and then you get 2 games, Carolina and Cal, and then another off week until the following Thursday for that Syracuse game. And then it's really just like, I mean, pedal to the metal, 5 weeks in a row, 5 Saturdays in a row to close things out, with 3 of those 5 being on the road. I think it's interesting closing on the road with back-to-back road games, Louisville and BC. not for anything really in particular. I mean, I guess it'll be those teams' senior nights, but I don't know if that really matters. I mean, if that matters, Clemson has to play Pitt on Pitt's senior night. So who cares? I'll tell you, I'm disappointed. And like, it's not really schedule related. It's opponents, and we've known opponents for a while. It's disappointing not to have Virginia Tech on the schedule. Like, they played Virginia Tech 11 years in a row, and very few of those games were uninteresting. They always, it seems like there was always some intrigue. There were very few blowouts in there. There were a couple. But for the most part, I mean, I like Virginia Tech as an annual opponent far more than Syracuse. There's just something unappealing about games against Syracuse. There's something unappealing about watching Syracuse play football. Whereas Virginia Tech, I sort of enjoy watching Virginia Tech. I like Pitt Virginia Tech games, and it's disappointing not to have them on the schedule to break that 11-year streak. I would drop a lot of these teams to get Virginia Tech back. I'd rather have Virginia Tech than Virginia. I'd rather have Virginia Tech than Boston College. I'd rather have Virginia Tech than Syracuse, like I say. So I'm disappointed about that. I'll miss that game this year. Here's an interesting factoid, Jim. Pitt has the same record since joining the ACC, the same record against Clemson that they have against Boston College. 2-2 against both of those teams. I think that's weird. I don't think I would have guessed that they had this. I mean, obviously I know what they've done against those teams, but you wouldn't expect them to have the same record against Clemson that they have against Boston College.
No, that's weird. And like the games they lost to Boston College, like they were just like such terrible losses, like the COVID year. Was like 2019. Like that was
a bad game.
That was a bad one. But then last year they beat them, and like I don't know, like not that Boston College was good, but Pitt wasn't good. So like I wasn't expecting that. So do you like I before the California teams got added, like I did like that Virginia Tech was part of like the annual rotation, and I mean even thinking back to like I know everyone made fun of the Coastal, but like a lot of those games were good. Like Pitt and Duke have played a lot of close games. Carolina, Virginia Tech, like those were like annual, like you knew them, and so it kind of stinks being in a 17-team conference. But that's more about college football than it is in the ACC.
Do you miss Miami?
Well, Pitt always lost those games, so I mean, like I kind of knew going in. I was like, I'm writing about a loss, I guess. But I don't know. That game never did much for me. I mean, I didn't really feel bad blood between the two teams. It was just like by the end of the year, like most years, like they would play Pitt and Miami at the end, and on most years, Miami usually quit by then.
But yeah, that was the fun thing about Miami is I feel like it always provided an opportunity for a big win. Pitt didn't get that win very much. Obviously they did at the end of the 2022 season. But it was like, oh, it's Miami. So it provided like an opportunity for a big win, even if they couldn't quite pull it off most years. But I was just thinking through, as you were talking, I was thinking through the Coastal teams, and like there were plenty of interesting Pitt Georgia Tech games, maybe not as many as there were with Virginia Tech or like you mentioned Duke or Carolina, but there were interesting games in there. Virginia is about the same. There were some interesting contests between Pitt and Virginia. Think back to like 2018, that Friday night game when they went down there. That was a big one for the run to the Coastal title. And a year later, they lost to them in the opener. They lost to Virginia in the opener. I miss the Coastal. I'll be with you on that. But I guess it is what it is. I don't know. Yeah, I think the placement of the bye weeks probably stands out the most. I think that's the most interesting thing. It's going to be a really weird stretch there for most of the month of October. And then, we'll see. I guess it'll be interesting. I mean, does Cal coming to Pittsburgh, does that do anything for you? I mean,
I think I wrote about that. It's like the first time the two teams are playing since 1966.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think both teams have the script on their helmets. So I guess that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's the first regular season game against SMU since 1983, but I don't know.
Do any of these road trips interest you? Don't want to go to Dallas?
I mean, I wouldn't mind, but it just seems like a really long way to go. It's just a long travel. I mean, like Cincinnati, I've had a good time every time. I've covered a bunch of games in Cincinnati, And I've had a good time. I think 2006, 8, and 10, I was out there. And I enjoyed myself. I enjoyed myself at the game. It's a small venue. It's kind of cool in that regard. I like the city of Cincinnati. It's not that bad to get to it. So I kind of, that one's all right. I have no interest in going to Chapel Hill again. I like Louisville a lot. Louisville's a fun place, although I don't know what it'll be like in late November, and I don't have any interest in going to Chestnut Hill. I think I was there once. I didn't go up in the COVID year. I went in 2014 when they played up there in 2014, and I got a flat tire on a rental car in the garage, and it was a night game. And the car and the rental car didn't have it had the jack, but it didn't have the handle you put in to actually crank it. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? So that was particularly frustrating. I came out of the game and the tire was flat. So I guess that's ruined me. I don't want to go to Chestnut Hill because of flat tires. But I don't know. What's the most appealing road trip here in your view?
I don't know. I've already scouted out. I'll probably do Cincinnati, Carolina, Louisville, and see how the season's going with Boston College. I don't think I'm making it to Dallas.
If there's something going on, if there's something to play for in that Boston College game, then yeah, that might be relevant. But yeah,
I had an interesting road trip this weekend.
Oh yeah, you went down to. Do you want to talk about basketball? You went down to Durham. How was the experience at Cameron?
It's unique because the Cameron Crazies are actually on your back. I don't know if you have ever done a game there, but
I haven't, but I've seen enough of it. Yeah.
But so you have to sit down an hour before the game because the kids they run to their spot and there's no space between the media and the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have an hour to kill. I pulled up the NFL game. One of the kids taps me on the shoulder. He's like, "Hey, can you move your screen a little bit? I want to watch the game too." So I mean, you're that close to these people, and you can hear everything they say, and they have all these weird traditions, and they reach over you all the time. So it's different, but I wouldn't want to do it every game, but it was fun.
Yeah, I mean, is the home media there, in that same area, or do they have a separate area where they're maybe not subject to that?
No, it's so small, but you can tell there's little aisle seats so they can get out, the guys that have been around for a while, and they know not to go to their seat until right before the game starts. So they kind of had it mapped out better than we did.
If you hadn't gotten to your seat an hour before, if it was 15 minutes until tip off, would you have been able to get to your seat?
I would have. I just would have had to climb over 30 people to get to it.
So if you had to go to the bathroom, so did you stand up at all from that hour before the game until the end of the game?
I stood up because I was taking a video of Blake Hinson standing on the table. That's the first time I stood up since an hour before the game. Blake ran over the table and I had my phone out. And
that's tough. That's tough. Well, you definitely got to see a heck of a game. With Blake Hinson making 7 of 7, you got to watch that from the sideline, which is always interesting. I think, when you take these two road games together, what stands out to me the most, and I think you wrote about it as well, is you had the Duke game where Blake Hinson goes off and scores 24 points, and then the Georgia Tech game where he's really a non-factor. He had the logo shot, but he only attempted one shot in the second half. It was all about the guards. It was all about the backcourt. And it was interesting to see them have back-to-back wins where they won in very different ways. One where Hinson carried the team and one where the guards carried the team. And, I mean, obviously you'd like to have the ideal scenario where everybody's clicking at once, but I sort of feel like it's kind of sustainable. I think the guards can keep playing at a really high level. And then when Hinson has the on nights, they can really blow up. You know what I mean? The team can really kind of explode. Do you get the same kind of feeling?
Yeah, because I think Jalen Lowe is actually really good, and I think he's always been this good. And they never really talked about it, but I guess he was hurt for the first couple months, or he wasn't 100%, and all of a sudden the light clicked for him, and he's actually really good. And I think he can make Bub Carrington good because Bub doesn't have to feel like he has to do everything. And Leggett had that little shoulder injury too. So you have all three of them clicking. And, one of the things I said about that Georgia Tech game last night is it felt like last year because Georgia Tech threw some punches. They hung with them. They took the lead. they didn't panic. They didn't start chucking threes. Like we didn't see like Blake and Bob just start playing hero ball. Like they kind of stuck to it, turned it up a notch, and got it out a win. And like that was very reminiscent of what something like Nelly Cummings and Jamarius Burton would do. So I thought that was just showing great growth from those three guards.
Yeah, it was huge to get Bub going. You know what I mean? Because like we haven't seen him play like that. I was looking back trying to find like that was that was his best game since blank, and I mean he scored 20 against Carolina. I think he had maybe 16 or 17 in the first Syracuse game, but like I haven't seen him look that in control, that comfortable, and that confident. And I don't know how long since the non-conference. I mean, would you agree? Is there a game I'm overlooking? Like since this, like going back to the non-conference, any of these like 6 ACC games prior to, or 5 ACC games prior to the Duke game? No, 6 ACC games prior to the Georgia Tech game. Is there one where he looked as good as he did in that one?
No, and like he did win Rookie of the Week, like I think first week of January, like right around that Syracuse game. But like I didn't necessarily think he played well. I mean,
Yeah,
he just like he hit some shots, but like he took like a high volume of shots, like just a couple of them went in, and he put up the numbers. But I didn't think he played well in those games. I thought he played well last night. He didn't force things. They had a couple turnovers, the guards in the first half, just the team overall, but again, like they really clamped down in those last 10 minutes. And whenever they kind of went on that, it was they were down 43-37. The
yeah,
Guillermo hit a three, and like that changed the game. That shot right there, everything went differently. So I don't know. I thought the poise really stood out watching them play live at Duke. Like they just never blinked in that game. That's always a Capel phrase. They didn't blink, but like
yeah.
they really didn't. Like there's times the crowd was into it. Duke made shots and they stuck with it. And it was a different environment. Georgia Tech's not as loud as Duke, but it's still playing on the road. It's still another team trying to defend its home court. And they also threw some punches and they withstood them. So I think that's good to see. It's now the challenge for them is like they play well on the road. Like they need to figure out how to play at home again.
Yeah. Yeah. Whatever that magic elixir is on the road. And I don't know what it is. I think there's a variety of things. I think there's something to be said for being taken out of your comfort zone and how it kind of leads you into, I don't know, to play a certain way, maybe a little more attention to details or what have you. But no, I thought you mentioned that stretch when it was 43-37. I thought that was huge. To have I think there was about 12 minutes left in the game too. And to have a game where you go down by 6 at that point in the second half and you're getting nothing from Blake Hinson, but you still, like you said, like don't blink. It was 12 seconds because they went up by 6 on that monster dunk, which got, that up and under dunk, which got everybody involved. Yeah, it was a great play. And it was the kind of play that like a team makes when they're really rolling and they have the momentum. And literally they just came right back down the court and Guillermo drained that three. I mean, it was 12 seconds later. It was 12:52 to 12:40. 12:52 was the dunk. 12:40 was Guillermo draining that three. And then on Pitt's next possession, Jalen Lowe got the N1. And then like one or two possessions later, Guillermo drains another three. And all of a sudden that 6-point lead with all the momentum behind the home team and the crowd and everything like that, now like it's gone. And Georgia Tech's down 3. It was really impressive to see it. And then they made big shots down the stretch. The guards made big shots down the stretch. The biggest problem, or the only problem, or I should say the only concern going forward, is they did all that and they pulled off the win last night with Bub Carrington playing all 20 minutes in the second half, Jalen Lowe playing all 20 minutes in the second half, and Ishmael Leggett playing like the final 18:39 of the second half. That's not sustainable. I would love it if you could play 3 guards all the time, but they can't. And we've talked about guard depth a million times. They need Blake Hinson to score for a lot of reasons. One, big one is that if he's scoring, they're not going to be forced to play 3 guards all the time. Capel can be a little more strategic about it. And I know we've talked about this a lot over the last 2 months, but what's the solution? Is it just keep rotating him and moving him around, and then when you need it, go to the 3 guards for 8 minutes? I mean, what's the solution here?
I think a positive development in this is Zach Austin looks more comfortable, and he's there was a time where he wasn't really playable. I mean, I think there was a couple games he only played 6 minutes, or West Virginia game he didn't really get in at all. And so right now, you can kind of those are kind of your 4 perimeter players. Even though Zach Austin isn't really a guard, he kind of fits out there. So it's you're rotating those three with Austin, but like I guess crunch time, like those last 10 minutes, I mean, you kind of want all three of them out there, just like that stretch you said, like with 4 minutes to go, when all three of them hit a shot in consecutive possessions, like that's what they can do for you. So it's going to be tough. I mean, they are guard short. Like they could use a fourth guard, and that fourth guard was dismissed before the season, but we
Yep.
won't bring him up much more.
Yeah, we'll probably keep doing it. Nothing we can do about that. Yeah, I mean, I think like I would stick with the starting lineup that they've had though. Like, I mean, if you want to mix the centers, I don't care. I don't mind bringing Guillermo off the bench. I would probably stick with Lowe, Carrington, Austin, Hinson, Federico. Would you, or would you make a change to that?
No, I like that, and like I think Guillermo's better than Federico, but I like the ability that he can come in and hit shots and like kind of give you that spark. Like Federico's never going to come in and give you instant offense like that. So I think that's kind of what you want from the bench, and I think Leggett's cool with it because like the minutes are still going to be there for him. Like it's not like he's losing out on playing time. So if that helps Carrington with Lowe on the floor with him and the two freshmen kind of are comfortable playing with each other, then roll with it. I kind of like having like punches off the bench, and I think Leggett and Guillermo can both do that.
Yeah, I agree. Somebody has a question here. This is weird. The Panther says, Steven Adams versus DeJuan Blair. Who is the best Pitt basketball player of all time? Steven Adams, I think, has the best career in the NBA for Pitt, if I'm not mistaken, so he gets the title, right? I got a few qualms here. First of all, I don't think you decide the best Pitt basketball player of all time based on their pro careers. Second of all, I don't know that Steven Adams even has had the best pro career of a Pitt basketball player of all time. I mean, Charles Smith averaged like 14 and 6. He was pretty good. Billy Knight I was just looking this up, averaged about 18 and 5 or 16 and 5. He was pretty good. Adams is a great player, but I'm not sure that we would say he's even the best Pitt pro of all time. And as far as the best Pitt basketball player of all time, I mean, Steven Adams, like in terms of college career, he's not even in the top 10.
He wasn't good at it.
No, I mean, he was, he did some things well, but in terms of college, Adams versus Blair is a no-brainer. I mean, Blair is legitimately in the top like 5 conversation, along with, Billy Knight and Charles Smith and probably Brandon Knight. But yeah, I think, the Panther says he's having a debate between him and his friends. He'd like an outsider's opinion. I mean, in terms of Pitt career, it's not even close. And in terms of pro career, yeah, Adams was a better pro than Blair. But if you're just talking about those two guys, maybe he's just talking about those two guys, then yeah, Adams is better. But I don't think Adams has been the best Pitt pro of all time. So a few issues there. ZC717 says, regardless of what Blake Hinson does the rest of the year, what he did after the Duke game was just priceless and great. He backed it up with his play, so he was fair game to do what he wanted. Jim, I never got around to digging into Jeff Capel's post-game comments, but you were down there. What did Capel say about that? Did he address Blake Hinson's theatrics?
He didn't. He was asked about it on Monday during the ACC coaches.
Oh, yeah, right.
Jerry asked him, like, "What'd you have to say to Blake?" He said, "That's between me and Blake." So he kind of didn't want it to get out. But during the press conference itself, he said, Blake was awesome, and he got revved up, and we had to get him back into neutral. I think that's what he said. I think he was referring to the technical more than anything. Yeah. So I don't know. That was just Blake being Blake. I mean, he's one of the more fun Pitt basketball players I've ever covered. I mean, he's a great quote. He's energetic. You can hear him talking up in the press box when we're at games. I mean, he's just that kind of guy. So I didn't. That's exactly like if Pitt was going to beat Duke and Blake Hinson was going to hit every shot he took. That's exactly what I expected from him.
Yeah, I mean, this wasn't like a random bench guy running over there. This was the guy who just drained 7 threes. There's not, I think I have to think Duke fans almost respected it a little bit. You know what I mean? They had to respect his performance and then respect the fact that he was willing to give it back to him. Just as good as they were giving it to him, he was willing to give it back to him. And so I think there had to have been a little bit of respect. Maybe not. Certainly John Shire and Kyle Filipowski were babies about it, but
big babies.
How about like Filipowski? Like, I didn't notice this in the game at Pitt, but I'm trying to think of the word to describe his play on the court. And an appropriate word and a clean word to use here, but he gets away with a lot, and like he like there I remember one possession with Ishmael Leggett guarding him, and that was one that really stood out of like he's just pushing him around while he's got the ball. He's got the ball and he's just like pushing him around. And there are times where maybe he shuffles his feet a little bit, but it seemed like a lot of offensive fouls could have been called and probably would have been called if a different shade of blue was doing it. And I don't want to, blame officials and things like that. I think there were plenty of ridiculous officiating things in that game, but I didn't notice it in that Pitt game. But boy, he gets pretty handsy out there. On offense, he gets pretty handsy.
Oh yeah, I mean his off arm or offhand has to be so strong because he has to push his whole way to get to the basket. I mean it was very noticeable down there because at Pitt games I don't know if people know where we sit. Like we're kind of like above everyone else. At Duke, you're on the floor and you watch it. I mean he just pushes his way to get there. I mean he's awesome. He's a great player, but like if they like enforced like how basketball is supposed to be called, he would have an offensive foul and be fouled out 5 minutes into the game. Like every time he touches the ball, it's an offensive foul.
Yeah. He also might get called for a foul for his use of cliches. Did you see his quote after the game that we just have to take this with a grain of salt and then remember that when every other team comes in here?
And then he was like, "Oh, this was their Super Bowl." I mean,
Yeah.
he had them all lined up and ready.
But like,
to
if
go.
you take something with a grain of salt, I don't think you then turn around and like use it as motivation when other teams like when you take it with a grain of salt, it means you're brushing it off. You know what I mean? You're not like you're paying it no mind. But if you're going to take it with a grain of salt and remember it the next time teams come to your building, I think you're missing the point of taking something with a grain of salt. But Shire, apologizing for what happened. I mean, if anything, if he's going to apologize for anything, it should be for the Duke fans giving, Blake Hinson the "you're number one" signal. I mean, that was, but whatever. To the victor go the spoils, right? I mean, when you win, you get to do things like that, I suppose. All right, so what's sustainable going forward? I mean, if they're going to play they are going to play at Miami on Saturday. If they're going to win that game, if they're going to really put together a winning streak, we've seen a lot of different things happen in these last two games, Jim. What is sustainable for this team if they're going to actually go out and win on Saturday?
Well, I look back at last year because Pitt and Miami played two really good games. Like that, Pitt had that 11-0 run to beat them there, and Miami beat them by 2 down there. And I looked at those games and I looked at the box score. Blake Hinson had, I think, averages 22.5 against Miami. He's from Florida. He'll play into the crowd. I think he had 11 threes against Miami last year. So I think Blake was quiet against Georgia Tech. I don't think they'll be quiet on Saturday.
Okay, so that's the key.
I think he's going to hit a lot of shots.
Yeah,
I don't know if we'll win, but he's going to be firing them up.
I think how Bub Carrington played on yesterday was as encouraging as anything we've seen. Just for him really kind of coming back to form. Jalen Lowe, it's been building for now 7 games in a row. He's averaging like 12 points per game over those 7, basically all the ACC games once the non-conference schedule ended. And so I think that's going to continue, but I think they need Bub to keep it up. If he can play like he was last night, they can really have a chance. And then Blake Hinson with his motivation. One last question about the football schedule. Jason Tadeo says, all things considered with the out-of-conference games, getting Clemson at home, no Florida State or Miami, probably a down Carolina team. Do you think this is one of the easier schedules in several years? What do you think?
I think it's manageable. I mean,
yeah,
we've known the 12 teams for a while, and I think we talked about it whenever they released like who was going to be on whose schedule. Like a couple, we keep having to write about like different ACC schedule models, but I don't know. I think it's a manageable schedule. I don't think they have any like really tough road games. Like I don't think Boston College is going to be this crazy tough environment. So
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, we'll see how the team is, but like schedule on paper, I don't think it's that daunting.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's almost in some ways similar to like 2021 a little bit. They had Clemson at home that year. They had the big non-conference game was Tennessee that year. I mean, that was on the road. West Virginia's at home. I guess in this equation, I mean, we're talking about Kent State and Western Michigan being the trade-off. Who else did they play in the non-conference?
In 2000,
UMass and New Hampshire in 21.
Yeah.
Okay, so not to equate Cincinnati and Kent State are the Massachusetts and Western Michigan here, I guess. Maybe not in that order. Maybe Kent State is the UMass and Cincinnati is the Western Michigan. Youngstown State would be the New Hampshire. I guess they had Miami that year. They don't have Miami this year. I don't know. Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, it seems, and I think you make a good point about the road games. I mean, at Carolina, weird things tend to happen there. Weird things with officiating tend to happen there. But yeah, there's not really that big daunting road trip. There's no Virginia Tech on the road or Florida State or on the road or Clemson on the road. Louisville could be a tough environment. Boston College, probably not. No idea about SMU. So yeah, I don't think it's a terribly, like you said, not terribly daunting. It's a winnable schedule. We're not even going to pretend to pick records now because I have no idea what these teams are like. I wrote down their records from last season, like what these teams did, and I'm like, none of this matters. They
could be completely different teams.
Yeah, Kent State going 1-11, that might be relevant and carry over. But I mean, West Virginia going 9-4. If we had this conversation last year, we would not have been talking about West Virginia as a potential 9-win team. Because going into that game, we didn't talk about West Virginia as a potential 9-win team. We didn't think they were going to be any good at all, and they end up winning 9 games. So it's impossible to tell. But at least we have the schedule. Now we can start making plans and booking travel and whatever else. But all right, well, Pitt Miami on Saturday. That's the game. See if the Panthers can extend to a 3-game winning streak. We'll have a live post-game show right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, and that way you can never miss any of our Pitt video content. We have our daily morning Pitt videos. We have the post-game show. We have this live stream here on Wednesday nights. It's all a lot of fun, and we appreciate everybody who's a part of it with the comments and questions on the chat screen. Jim, I appreciate you and getting your new headphones and being up close in this perspective. I'm not sure if we're going to do it again. It's kind of weird, but we'll see. We'll see what we think going forward. But thanks everybody for tuning in. Like this video and subscribe, and check out the website Panther-Lair.com. Enjoy the rest of your night, and we will talk to you tomorrow morning for the morning pit right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.